that opening.
Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience except these last hope attempts that maybe some pennies would be worth it on a deal that has not been worth anything.
Shedeur Sanders is out there right now in the summer heat, running routes in cotton clothes and bolt cleats, outrunning everybody on that field. And the Cleveland Browns front office is still sitting in a room somewhere, seriously entertaining the idea of handing the starting job back to Deshaun Watson. Let that sink in for a moment. Let that genuinely, completely, fully sink in. The most electric, the most talked about, the most scrutinized young quarterback in the entire National Football League is putting in the kind of elite, jaw-dropping, turn every single head on that practice field work that veterans twice his age would not dare attempt. And the franchise that drafted him is still playing games, still hedging, still refusing to make the obvious, the rational, the only defensible decision available to them. This is NFL gossip, and today we are exposing exactly what this league does not want you to see. Because what is happening in Cleveland right now is not just a quarterback competition. It is not just a training camp storyline. What is happening in Cleveland right now is a slow-motion, front office manufactured, self-sabotaging catastrophe that is being dressed up as a process. And if the Cleveland Browns front office makes the wrong call on this, if they look at everything Shedeur Sanders is showing them and still find a reason to go a different direction, then they will have committed one of the most laughable, tone-deaf, franchise-destroying blunders in the modern history of this league. And I want you to stay with me for every single second of this video, because by the time we are done here, you are going to understand exactly who benefits from keeping Shedeur Sanders off that field on opening day, and it is not the Cleveland Browns, and it is absolutely not the fans. So let us start from the very beginning, because context matters here, and the full picture of what Shedeur Sanders has already survived is something the national media has been criminally, deliberately, almost maliciously reluctant to tell you. Shedeur Sanders was drafted by the Cleveland Browns and thrown, not eased, not carefully placed, but thrown into the most structurally broken, the most organizationally dysfunctional, the most offensively incompetent situation a young quarterback could possibly inherit in the National Football League. We are not talking about a team that was slightly below average. We are not talking about a rebuilding project with a few missing pieces. We are talking about an offense that by every meaningful measure was the worst in the National Football League last season. Second to last, third to last, fourth to last in basically every single statistical category you care to name. And the one category where the Browns were not near the bottom? Offensive incompetence. That is the one area where they led the entire league. And here is the part that is going to make your blood absolutely boil. Because when you look at what Shedeur Sanders was asked to do in that environment, when you actually break down the conditions under which he was operating, the conversation changes completely. The offensive line protecting him was, by multiple credible accounts, as bad as anyone covering this league had ever seen at that level. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about what it means to be a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback, trying to process an NFL defense, trying to go through your reads, trying to execute an offense, when the men in front of you cannot hold their blocks long enough for you to even finish your first read. You do not have time to see the field. You do not have time to process information. You do not have time to make the right decisions. You are surviving, not playing. And on top of that, on top of the historically bad protection, Shedeur Sanders had almost nothing to throw to. The receiver room around him was thin, inexperienced, and unreliable. No time in the pocket, no weapons on the outside. That is the environment this young man was asked to succeed in. And the national media, the same outlets that will spend 45 minutes breaking down Patrick Mahomes' footwork, took Shedeur Sanders' statistics from that season and put them on television like they meant something, like they told the real story, like the numbers existed in a vacuum, disconnected from the catastrophic, historically bad infrastructure that produced them. NFL Live went on the air and shared Shedeur Sanders' worst statistics, and they presented them with the kind of gravity usually reserved for a veteran quarterback who has had every resource available and still failed. That is not journalism. That is not analysis. That is a hit piece dressed up in graphics and studio lighting. But here is where it gets so much worse, because not everyone in that building stayed quiet. Not everyone on that set was willing to play along, and the voices that pushed back are not random commentators. These are heavy hitters. These are credible, respected, nationally recognized football analysts. Listen to what they actually said.
What I would say, though, is this is the truest quarterback competition in the NFL. What I mean by that is Whoever performs best in training camp should be the Week 1 starter.
They said it out loud on the record. Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience except these last hope attempts that maybe some pennies would be worth it on a deal that has not been worth anything. I want you to sit with that framing for a second. A deal that has not been worth anything. That is not a hot take from a blogger. That is not some fringe opinion from someone with an axe to grind. That is a sober, measured, nationally credible football voice saying out loud what every single person watching the Cleveland Browns has known for over a year. The Deshaun Watson era in Cleveland has produced nothing. Nothing of value. Nothing of substance. Nothing that justifies the astronomical, the staggering, the genuinely mind-blowing cost that the Browns paid to acquire him and then guarantee him money that most franchises would not give to a proven superstar, let alone a quarterback who had not played a meaningful snap in years when they signed him. And that is the villain in this story. Let me be completely clear with you. The villain here is not any single person making a phone call in an office somewhere. The villain is the institutional, organizational, front office mindset that looks at Deshaun Watson, at that contract, at that history, at that performance record, and still sees a viable path forward. Still sees a reason to keep the door open. Still sees a competition where, by any honest assessment, there should not be one. Because here is what the Cleveland Browns front office is actually doing when they frame this as a legitimate quarterback competition. They are not being fair to Shedeur Sanders. They are not being transparent with their fan base. They are protecting a sunk cost. They are covering for a catastrophic financial decision by refusing to fully commit to the future, because fully committing to the future means admitting that the past was a disaster. And organizations that cannot admit their mistakes are organizations that keep repeating them. That is not me being dramatic. That is not some clickbait hot take. That is simply what the pattern shows. So let us talk about what Shedeur Sanders is actually doing right now. Right now, in the weeks leading up to training camp, Shedeur Sanders is in the gym. He is on the practice field. He is running routes in cotton clothes. Not in full pads, not in performance gear, but in cotton, in bolt cleats, moving with the kind of natural, fluid, effortless athleticism that you simply cannot coach into a player. The footwork, the cuts, the burst. Every single person watching those workouts is turning their heads. Every coach, every teammate, every observer who has seen those sessions has come away talking about how ready, how locked in, how absolutely dialed in this young man looks heading into the most important training camp of his young career. And here is what makes that even more significant. Because Shedeur Sanders is not just showing up and going through the motions. He is not just checking boxes. He is doing the kind of detailed, obsessive, relentless preparation that tells you everything you need to know about a player's mentality. He is getting his body ready for Todd Monken's offense. He is putting in the work to understand a new system, to build chemistry with a new coaching staff, to position himself to take full advantage of an offensive environment that is dramatically, measurably better than the one he was thrown into last season. And it is dramatically better. Let me walk you through exactly how much better, because this is a critical piece of the argument that the front office cannot ignore. This offseason, the Cleveland Browns went out and spent aggressively in free agency. They went out and upgraded the offensive line, the same offensive line that was, by credible accounts, as bad as anyone had ever seen at this level. They drafted a young offensive lineman to add youth and athleticism to that group. The protection situation is meaningfully, tangibly improved. And then they went out and addressed the receiver room. They brought in weapons. Jerry Jeudy is in that building. Harif Fenton is in that building. Branzel Boston is in that building. The pieces that were not there when Shedeur Sanders was fighting for his life behind a broken offensive line last season, those pieces are there now. Which brings me to the thing nobody in the media will say out loud. Because if the conditions around Shedeur Sanders were so catastrophically bad last year that even his harshest critics acknowledged the environment was broken, and those conditions have now been meaningfully improved, then the only honest evaluation of his potential has not happened yet. It has not happened. The version of Shedeur Sanders that the Cleveland Browns front office is weighing against Deshaun Watson is a version that was operating in the worst possible circumstances. The version that is about to show up to training camp is a version with better protection, better weapons, a full offseason of system installation, and the kind of burning, focused, chip-on-his-shoulder motivation that only comes from having been doubted publicly and repeatedly. And if you need more authority than that, let me bring in the next voice. Because Field Yates, who covers this league at the highest level, who has sources inside these organizations, who does not make reckless statements on national television, weighed in on this quarterback competition. And what he said is not ambiguous, it is not hedged, it is direct, and it is damning for anyone who wants to pretend this is a genuinely open competition. Don't take my word for it. These are heavy hitters. Listen.
Here's the two routes, okay? Route 1. He exceeds expectations and shows that he could be an NFL quarterback. Wonderful. The other route, which is the ends of the board, are, yeah, this guy's not moving the needle.
Let me say that back to you in the harshest possible terms so you do not miss it. This is the truest quarterback competition in the NFL. Whoever performs best in training camp should be the Week 1 starter. Field Yates said that. Field Yates, one of the most connected, most respected NFL insiders working today, looked at the Cleveland Browns quarterback room and called it the truest competition in the league. And then he said the quiet part out loud, that in Cleveland, unlike in other situations where you might protect a young player by keeping a veteran in place early, whoever performs best should be on that field opening week. Now I want you to think about what that statement is quietly, carefully, deliberately implying. Because Field Yates is not saying this is a coin flip. He is not saying Watson has the edge. He is saying that the normal organizational instinct to protect a young player by defaulting to the veteran. That instinct does not apply here. In Cleveland, the calculus is different. In Cleveland, the only defensible standard is performance. And every single indicator we have about Shedeur Sanders' current performance, his current preparation, his current trajectory, points in one direction. But here is where it gets even more damning. Because the question is not just whether Shedeur Sanders is performing better than Deshaun Watson. The question is what the Cleveland Browns front office is actually protecting by keeping this competition open. And when you look at it through that lens, through the lens of institutional motivation rather than football logic, the picture becomes genuinely disturbing. The Cleveland Browns guaranteed Deshaun Watson a contract that is still on the books. A contract that is still costing this franchise real, significant, franchise-altering money, even as Watson sits on the roster as a backup. And every single day that the front office maintains the fiction that Watson is a legitimate starting option, every single day they keep the door open even a crack, they are doing two things simultaneously. They are protecting themselves from the full public accounting of that catastrophic decision, and they are doing it at the direct expense of Shedeur Sanders' development, his confidence, his momentum, and his future. That is the pattern. That is the grievance that every Browns fan watching this should be furious about. Not just the decision itself, but the institutional cowardice behind it, the willingness to sacrifice a young quarterback's best developmental window on the altar of organizational ego. And here is what makes it even more egregious, even more tone-deaf, even more self-sabotaging. Because John Fanta, another nationally credible football voice, went on the air and laid out the two possible outcomes of starting Shedeur Sanders with complete, ruthless clarity. And both of those outcomes are better for the Cleveland Browns than the alternative. Watch this, straight from their own mouth.
With that being said, you must start Shedeur Sanders simply because, for one, he was playing under the worst offensive line. I don't care what quarterback is under center.
They said it, right there. He exceeds expectations and shows that he could be an NFL quarterback. Wonderful. Or, this guy is not moving the needle, he is not getting any better, and it is really not working. And guess what? We have to go draft a quarterback. We have got multiple picks to do that. We could trade up in the 2027 draft. That is the analysis. That is the full, complete, intellectually honest framework. And I want you to notice something about those two outcomes. Notice what is missing. Notice what is not on the list. Deshaun Watson succeeding, that is not on the list. That is not one of the outcomes. Because the credible football voices who are actually engaging with this situation honestly are not even including Watson's success as a realistic scenario worth planning around. The conversation has moved past that. The conversation is now entirely about what you learn from Shedeur Sanders. Either you confirm you have your quarterback, or you confirm you need to draft one. And either way, you are better positioned than you are right now. And that is what makes the front office's hesitation so genuinely, so completely, so mind-blowingly indefensible. Because the argument for starting Shedeur Sanders is not just that he is better than Watson right now. The argument is that starting Shedeur Sanders is the only rational, forward-looking, franchise-building decision available regardless of outcome. You start him and he thrives, you have your guy. You start him and he struggles, you have real information, you have draft capital, you have a path forward. You bench him and start Watson, you have nothing. You learn nothing, you gain nothing. You protect nothing except the feelings of a front office that does not want to publicly own its mistakes. Let me be completely clear with you about something. I want every single person watching this to understand the specific concrete cost of the wrong decision here. Because this is not an abstract debate about football philosophy. This is about a young man's career. This is about a window of development that once missed cannot be recovered. Quarterbacks develop in games. They develop in real competitive situations, against real defensive schemes, with real consequences. They do not develop watching from the sideline. They do not develop in practice reps that everyone knows are not the real thing. Every single week that Shedeur Sanders spends on that bench, if the front office makes the catastrophically wrong call and defers to Watson, is a week of irreplaceable developmental experience that is gone forever. Quarterbacks who come into the league and sit, who have their momentum interrupted, who have their confidence managed by an organization that is more concerned with its own narrative than with their growth, those quarterbacks almost never reach their ceiling. The ones who develop into franchise players are almost universally the ones who were given the ball, trusted with the job, and allowed to grow through the inevitable struggles of early NFL play. And here is the part that should make every single Browns fan genuinely, deeply, personally furious. Because the Cleveland Browns have spent the last several years asking their fans to trust the process, to believe in the plan, to accept short-term pain for long-term gain. They burned draft capital on Watson. They absorbed the public relations damage. They watched their team lose game after game after game while Watson was unavailable, while Watson was coming back, while Watson was supposedly getting healthy. And through all of it, the fan base was asked to be patient. And now when the future has arrived, when the young quarterback who represents the actual path forward is in the building, is in the gym, is on the practice field, turning heads with elite-level preparation, the organization is still hedging, still protecting the past instead of investing in the future, still asking the fans to wait just a little bit longer. That is not a process. That is a betrayal. And it does not stop there, because when you zoom out and look at the broader context of what the Cleveland Browns have built around Shedeur Sanders this offseason, the argument for starting him becomes even more overwhelming, even more urgent, even more impossible to honestly argue against. Think about what they went out and did. They invested heavily in the offensive line. They brought in receivers. They added Jerry Jeudy, who at his best is a legitimate, dangerous, separation-creating weapon on the outside. They added Harif Fenton. They added Branzel Boston. They built a receiving core that, for the first time in Shedeur Sanders' professional career, gives him actual options, actual targets, actual weapons to work with. They hired Todd Monken to run an offense that is designed to put a quarterback in position to succeed. I want you to think about what that means. The Cleveland Browns front office, the same front office that is now entertaining the idea of starting Deshaun Watson, spent a massive amount of money and resources this offseason, building an environment specifically designed for a young quarterback to flourish. They did not build that environment for Deshaun Watson. Watson is not the future they are investing in with those moves. Those moves are an investment in a future that Shedeur Sanders is supposed to be the centerpiece of. And then they turn around and consider not starting him. That is the definition of self-sabotaging. That is the definition of an organization operating against its own stated interests. That is the definition of a front office that is so paralyzed by the weight of its past mistakes that it cannot take the obvious, necessary, forward-looking action directly in front of it. Which brings me to the pattern, because this is not the first time the Cleveland Browns front office has shown this particular brand of institutional cowardice. This is not the first time they have had the right answer in front of them and found a reason to delay it. This is not the first time they have prioritized the protection of a bad decision over the development of a good one. The Watson situation itself is the most glaring example. The decision to guarantee that contract, to commit that deeply to a player with that many question marks, was a decision made to protect an organizational narrative rather than to build a winning football team. And it cost them years. Years of competitive football. Years of development, years of relevance, and now they are standing at another crossroads, and the exact same institutional instinct that led to the Watson disaster is pushing them toward another version of the same mistake. The instinct to protect the past instead of betting on the future. The instinct to manage optics instead of making the hard, honest, correct call. The instinct to hedge when what the situation demands is commitment. Let me give you the third voice, because this is not just one analyst, not just two. The consensus among the credible football voices who have weighed in on this situation is not ambiguous. It is not split. It is not a debate where reasonable people can look at the evidence and come to different conclusions. Here it is. Cameras rolling, no edit.
For that opening.
Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience except these last hope attempts that maybe some pennies would be worth it on a deal that has not been worth anything.
You must start Shedeur Sanders simply because, for one, he was playing under the worst offensive line. I don't care what quarterback is under center. You're not going to have good numbers when you have no time in the pocket. No time in the pocket. No time to throw. No time to process. No time to make the right reads. That is the context. That is the full, complete, honest context that the national media buried under a pile of bad statistics and misleading graphics. Shedeur Sanders was not failing last season. Shedeur Sanders was surviving an environment that would have broken most veteran quarterbacks, let alone a rookie who had never taken an NFL snap before that season. And I want to dwell on that specific word for a moment, surviving, because surviving is not the same as failing. Surviving means you are still standing. Surviving means you absorbed everything the worst possible circumstances could throw at you, and you are still here, still working, still preparing, still showing up to the practice field in the summer heat and turning heads with the kind of elite speed, technically precise, physically demanding training that says everything about who this young man is and what he is capable of. I want you to picture this. I want you to genuinely, vividly picture what Shedeur Sanders is doing right now while this conversation is happening, while analysts debate his statistics, while the front office hedges, while the national media runs its misleading graphics. Shedeur Sanders is on a practice field, in cotton clothes with bolt cleats, running cuts that are drawing comparisons to elite professional athletes. He is not sulking. He is not demanding a trade. He is not complaining to reporters or leaking frustration to beat writers. He is working. He is preparing. He is doing everything a franchise quarterback is supposed to do, in the face of every possible reason to be discouraged. And he is doing it with the kind of focused, relentless, almost machine-like intensity that tells you this young man understands exactly what is at stake. That is character. That is the kind of character you cannot manufacture. That is the kind of character that, when it is paired with the right environment and the right opportunity, produces franchise quarterbacks. And the Cleveland Browns front office is sitting on it like it is a problem to be managed rather than a gift to be unleashed. Now let us talk about predictions. Let us talk about what happens from here, because this story is not over and the decisions being made right now will echo through this franchise for years. I am going to stake some very specific positions and I want you to hold me to them. First prediction. If the Cleveland Browns start Shedeur Sanders on opening day, with the improved offensive line and the upgraded receiving core around him, this team wins more games than anyone is currently projecting. The defense, which was legitimately solid last season even as the offense collapsed around it, does not need the offense to put up 30 points a week. It needs the offense to be functional. It needs the offense to convert on third down, to sustain drives, to give the defense rest. Shedeur Sanders, with real protection and real weapons, can absolutely do that. This team could be a surprise in the AFC North, and Shedeur Sanders could end the season as one of the most talked about developmental success stories in the league. Second prediction. If the Cleveland Browns do not start Shedeur Sanders, if they find a reason, any reason, to delay the inevitable and give Deshaun Watson meaningful snaps early in the season, the fan base revolt will be immediate, sustained, and louder than anything this franchise has experienced in recent memory. Browns fans have been patient. They have absorbed loss after loss, disappointment after disappointment, broken promise after broken promise. And they have done it because they believed the franchise was building towards something. The moment it becomes clear that the front office is still protecting the Watson investment at Shedeur Sanders' expense, that patience evaporates, and it does not come back. Third prediction. The front office's job security is directly tied to this decision. This is not an exaggeration. This is not me being dramatic. The Cleveland Browns organization has a narrow, specific, time-sensitive window to demonstrate to its fan base that it has learned from its mistakes. Starting Shedeur Sanders is the clearest, most visible, most tangible way to demonstrate that learning. Failing to start him is the clearest, most visible, most tangible demonstration that nothing has changed. That the same institutional cowardice that produced the Watson disaster is still running the show. And organizations that demonstrate that kind of persistent, pattern-based failure do not keep their leadership teams intact for long. And here is the thing that nobody wants to say out loud, but I am going to say it because it is true and it matters. The Cleveland Browns are not just making a football decision right now. They are making a franchise-defining decision. They are deciding whether they are an organization that learns, adapts, and invests in the future, or an organization that protects its past at the expense of its future. They are deciding whether Shedeur Sanders gets the full, fair, properly supported opportunity to show what he can do, or whether he gets another half chance in a compromised situation that tells everyone watching exactly nothing useful. And if they get this wrong, if they look at everything Shedeur Sanders is showing them right now, everything the credible football voices are telling them, everything the evidence of last season's context demands of them, and they still find a reason to go backward, to go back to Watson, to go back to the sunk cost, to go back to the mistake, then the doom scenario is not a fantasy, it is a roadmap. Picture the Cleveland Browns 3 years from now. Picture an organization that delayed Shedeur Sanders' development by a season, maybe 2, while protecting a contract that was never going to produce a return on investment. Picture the draft capital that was accumulated, the picks that were supposed to be the foundation of a rebuild, being spent not on the next franchise quarterback, but on patching the holes created by another year of organizational paralysis. Picture a fan base that has finally, permanently checked out. Not angry anymore, not outraged, just gone. Attendance cratering, viewership declining, the national media treating Cleveland as a cautionary tale rather than a competitive franchise. That is where this road leads if the front office makes the wrong call. That is the franchise collapse prophecy that is sitting at the end of the path they are currently considering. And the maddening, the genuinely infuriating, the almost incomprehensible thing about it is that the exit ramp is right there. The correct decision is obvious. The evidence is overwhelming. The credible voices are unanimous. The young man himself is doing everything right. The Cleveland Browns front office does not need a consultant. It does not need more data. It does not need to wait and see how training camp unfolds before making a decision that should already be made. It needs to start Shedeur Sanders on day 1, give him the real protection and real weapons they spent this offseason acquiring, and get out of the way. That is not a complicated ask. It is the most straightforward, the most defensible, the most obviously correct decision this organization has in front of it. And every single day they delay it is a day they are choosing the past over the future, the mistake over the correction, the cowardice over the commitment. And that is not me being dramatic. That is not clickbait. That is simply what the evidence demands. The longer this front office keeps making these self-sabotaging, ego-protecting, institutionally cowardly decisions, the more likely it becomes that this entire regime implodes and takes the franchise down with it. The window for Shedeur Sanders is open right now. It will not stay open forever. And the Cleveland Browns front office needs to understand, needs to genuinely, viscerally understand that getting this wrong is not a recoverable mistake. It is the kind of mistake that defines an organization for a generation. Start Shedeur Sanders. Day 1. No competition, no hedging, no protecting the past. The future is already on that practice field, in cotton clothes, turning every single head in sight. All the front office has to do is get out of the way. Now here is what I need from every single person watching this video. Drop a comment right now and tell me, should the Cleveland Browns front office be held fully accountable for what happens to Shedeur Sanders' development this season? Because if you believe, as I believe, as the credible football voices believe, as the evidence demands, that this young man deserves the full, fair, properly supported opportunity to show what he can do, then say it. Say it in the comments, make some noise. Because the only thing louder than a front office protecting its mistakes is a fan base that refuses to let it happen quietly. And I want to hear from you on the forced choice, because this is the question that cuts right to the heart of it. If training camp ends and the competition is genuinely close, do you trust the Cleveland Browns front office to make the right call and start Shedeur Sanders, or do you believe they will find a reason to go backward? Tell me in the comments, I want to know where you stand. If you are new here, this is NFL Gossip, and this is what we do. We tell you the truth about what is happening in this league, we back it up with the voices that matter, and we do not stop until the full picture is on the table. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss a single video, because this Shedeur Sanders story is only getting bigger, and we are going to be here for every single development. This is NFL Gossip. We will see you in the next one.
What I would say, though, is this is the truest quarterback competition in the NFL. What I mean by that is whoever performs best in training camp should be the week 1 starter.
Here's the 2 routes, okay? Route 1, he exceeds expectations and shows that he could be an NFL quarterback. Wonderful. The other route, which is the ends of the board, are, yeah, this guy's not moving the needle.
With that being said, you must start Shedeur Sanders simply because, for one, he was playing under the worst offensive line. I don't care what quarterback is under center.